IPMNation.com.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a
Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. John Rich, and you have tuned in to Dr. John's Neighborhood. I'm excited to have you join me today. This is my continuing quest to share what I have learned about certain areas of psychology that I think can be particularly useful to people in living better lives, being better parents, and increasing their well-being. A lot of the research that's out there is really high-quality research, and the findings can be pretty powerful, but the average person who doesn't have a PhD doesn't have access to that research, and even if they did have access to that research, they might not be able to understand what the people in it were saying. We psychologists have our own jargon that we use, just like any kind of profession. We have these big words that we use, and the consequences that people who haven't been trained in what those big words mean get excluded from the conversation. And so my aim is to shift from being merely an academic writer to being somebody who takes academic writing and then translates it for my readers and my listeners out there. So, to that end, my guest is somebody really intriguing. Let me back up. It was not too long ago, I guess it was in April, that my wife and my son, my oldest son, Josiah, were acting in a play called The Elephant Man. So if you haven't heard of The Elephant Man is a person from the 1880s who was afflicted with a bone and skin deforming disorder that we now know as proteus, Proteus. And so the story is about how this man struggled to survive and the kinds of reactions that people had to him because he was not, he didn't look normal. And people in the 1880s were not prone to be empathetic to people who looked like that. In fact, in the first part of the play, he is bullied and taken advantage of by lots of people. But then this doctor at a hospital takes him in, and he gets the ability to, I don't know that it's a normal life, but it's at least a life where there are people around him who are treating him like a human being. Something interesting that happened is, as a result of that play being put on in Delaware, we came to find out that there is a man who lives here in my hometown of Dover, Delaware. His name is Brian Richards, and he actually has the same disorder that the Elephant Man had. He has proteus, and he came to the show, and not to be mean, but you can tell that he has some kind of affliction. And what's interesting is that he is lucky enough to have been born in this current year, because he has been able to get numerous plastic surgeries to try to keep some of the deformities at a minimum, or to make his appearance and his functioning a little bit closer to capacity. It's difficult for me to find the exact words that should be used to describe what's going on, but he came to the show, and I thought to myself, that would be an incredible guest. And I went up to him and I asked him if he would be willing to be on the show, and he agreed. So he came over to my house and we talked about what proteus is and how he's struggled, and also just generally the need for empathy. And so that brings us to the first part of the show. You're going to hear an excerpt from an interview I did with Matt Connarton of WMNH Radio in New Hampshire about how to teach children to have empathy for other people. So that's really what it's all about here, the story of the Elephant Man and parenting in general. I think if you ask people about some goals that they might have for their children, I think a lot of people would say that they want them to be kind and to have empathy for other people. So first part of the show, you're going to hear that interview where I talk about some research on helping children develop empathy, and then we'll go to a commercial, and then you'll hear this really incredible conversation that I had with Brian Richards about proteus and living life with proteus. Enjoy.
Dr. John D. Rich Jr., is that you?
It's me. That's the first time I ever realized that the reason he needs a doctor is because he can hardly walk.
Yeah, you probably can't help him with that, can you? I mean, you know.
I didn't realize what he was actually saying. It really never really gave it much thought.
Yes. When he says he can hardly walk, yes, he is. If you are actually, I'll tell you something. It's funny when you realize what a certain song lyric really means, and you go, "Oh." Just a couple of years ago, I was driving, and I happened to hear. And I usually, because I'm a radio guy and I like to scan through, I still like to scan through the FM band and see what I land on. And if it's something interesting, I'll stick with it. And if not, I'll hit scan again. And I happen to, I don't know why, because usually if it's classic rock, it's like, I've heard all these songs a million times, I don't care. But for some reason, I happen to land on ZZ Top, Gimme All Your Lovin'. And for whatever reason, I don't know if I was distracted or lost in my thoughts or whatever, but normally I would change it. Don't get me wrong, love ZZ Top, and it's a great song, but I've heard it a million times. But it got to a particular, for whatever reason, I just left it. I just let it play, and it got to a particular lyric. And this was just a couple years ago after hearing the song my whole life, where he says, "If I blow my top, will you let it go to your head?" And all of a sudden it clicked in my head. I was like, "Oh," and I finally got what that meant, and it had never occurred to me before.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, a lot of songs have that like underlayer that's not very proper.
Yes. So, so how are you, sir? Welcome back to Matt Connarton Unleashed in the Afternoon.
Thanks.
Yes.
I look forward to these conversations.
I do too.
Appreciate it.
I do too. I know you wanted to discuss today your latest column, and I did read it earlier. Oops, I think I closed that window inadvertently. I want to get back to it, actually. It occurred to me it might be nice if I actually have it open on my computer if I want to refer to something as you're speaking about it. But
yeah, well, that's what I do. I have it open so that I can use it to keep my thoughts going in the right direction.
Yes. And I thought this was a particularly interesting article, How to Raise Good Children. Part of what I find interesting about it is that there is I know that there are these theories, there are these ideas or these studies that have been done, because you discuss empathy, teaching your kids about empathy in this article, and among some other things that you sort of touch on. And I know that there's been studies that suggest that there has been a sort of a generational increase in empathy. And I don't know how much stock you put in that, if you think that that's true, but I know that one of the theories I've read about is that because we're such an online world now, that because people communicate so much online and people text instead of calling each other, so it's sort of on some level has made human interaction itself somewhat less personal, and so therefore people are less apt to have empathy for others, which I think actually we've discussed this on the show before too, on social media, how, people will say really horrific things to each other that, or at least you would hope they would never say to another human being in person.
Right.
But is that true in your view? Is there because I don't think you got into that specifically in the article, but do you think that there is a reduction in human empathy in our society? And if so, is it a generational thing that's happening?
Well, I've definitely read articles that have talked about the fact that people have so much screen time that their social skills are sometimes being negatively affected.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that at my university where I teach, you can walk across campus and see plenty of people who are just walking, looking down at their phone.
Oh, yeah.
They're not interacting with anybody. The other funny thing is that the looking at the phone is kind of an avoidance move that people can make now that they didn't have before. So if you're walking somewhere and you see somebody that you don't want to have to talk to, you can look down at your phone and pretend that you're texting somebody.
Yes.
And chances are they're not going to interrupt you because there's this unwritten rule that you don't interrupt somebody who's doing something on their phone.
And by the way, the irony of that being, if they do interrupt, they're the one being rude, right? Because they're interrupting when in fact, you might, some would look at that situation and say, well, actually the person looking down at their phone is being rude. So then you kind of get into that question of who's the rude one. Right.
Yeah. I mean, so without really knowing what the data might say, I would guess that since empathy is kind of a function of practice, you can become more empathic. I've never been sure, is it empathic or empathetic?
Well, I
guess I should probably know that.
Well, I think my perception is that the two versions of that, the two forms of that word have different connotations. Like empathetic would be simply showing empathy for another person, whereas empathic would be that sort of like people tell me that I'm empathic, that I can actually sense
more like a spiritual thing or something.
Exactly. That like I've been told I'm an empath, and I tend to actually think that I probably am, if you believe in that, and I do. But that's what I think the difference is. Yeah.
I see. Okay, so empathetic. So I mean, being empathetic to some degree is a matter of practicing empathy and perspective taking and purposely thinking about what another person might be feeling or experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be vicarious. I mean, part of the purpose of the article is to suggest that if your parents are empathetic and when you're watching the news, they express a level of sympathy or care for somebody who's been victimized, or the kinds of trauma that people have when there's a natural disaster, that the child is going to pick up on that as a way to interpret events that are like that. And on the other side, if you have a parent who watches those kinds of things and ridicules the people who are being victimized, then that becomes acceptable. So
sure,
if people are on their technology often enough that they're not getting as much practice in understanding where another person is coming from and having those feelings and being comfortable with those feelings, then that might suggest that we've got a decline in empathy. But I'm talking out of turn if I say that with any confidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to prove or measure, I suppose. and I mean, we all see examples of people not being empathetic. But then again, I mean, there's always, pre-internet, of course. I mean, we've all known people who, well, those of us who are old enough to remember pre-internet, we've all known people who, even before that, didn't seem particularly empathetic to others. So it's certainly not a new phenomenon. But
yeah. Well, so I was thinking, how do we have this conversation? And I was thinking that maybe I could just ask you a question, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I think it's a simple question for people to answer.
Sure.
If you're like, what I want you to do is think of somebody without naming them. Think of somebody that when you think of them, you think that's a good person right there.
Okay.
There must be somebody in your life that you know of, and you think of them as a good person. And then think about somebody that you think is a bad person.
Yep, that's easy.
And
yep.
So what does the good person do? What is it about the good person that makes them good? And what is it about the bad person that is lacking that makes them fall on the other end of the spectrum? Do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, that's easy. I mean, the answer is empathy. The good person I'm thinking of has empathy for others and genuinely cares about others in many instances more than herself, whereas the bad person that I'm thinking of is only out for himself and is completely indifferent to the feelings of others or the harm that he does to others.
Right. So, for example, if the bad person were to be in a position of power where they could pass a massive tax cut that would pad their bank account to an insane degree.
Yes.
That might be, yeah. Sorry to do that because maybe you have listeners that don't appreciate that comment. But
they can handle it.
It seems to me, in reflecting on what a good person looks like, that the primary characteristics of somebody that we think of as good are that they're not completely egotistical and selfish, that they are putting time and effort and energy into feeling somebody else's or sympathizing with somebody else's plight and often acting to try to help ameliorate it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's like the basis of the article is to talk about when we're talking about what makes a person good. Psychologists tend to call that somebody who is pro-social. I use the word pro-social to describe that.
Mm-hmm.
That their thought processes, their cognitions are oriented toward thinking about other people. That they are thinking about how they can influence the world, how they can try to make the world a better place. My guess is that, the joking that you do on your show aside, that there's probably a part of you that feels like your radio show is contributing to society in some way. Is that accurate?
There's a big part of me that hopes that the show is contributing to society in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if there's necessarily a part of me that believes that it is, but the hope.
Okay.
But the hope part, Doctor, is tremendous. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that most people who have an interest in being pro-social have some kind of motivating force behind what they do on a daily basis that they're hoping leaves some kind of legacy or makes another person's life a little bit better or gives somebody food for thought or something like that.
Right, right.
And so, in a nutshell, the article is talking about those kinds of things, the practice of thinking about what my values are and trying to empathize with other people and trying to take somebody else's perspective. I talk about how if every day when you go to work, if you pass some homeless guy, that it's a lot harder to pass him every single day without at least feeling something for his plight if you know what his name is.
Right.
If you know that that guy's name is Glenn, that's a lot harder to dismiss whatever's going on with him than if he's just a thing that you have to walk around in order to get through the door.
That's interesting that you put it that way because, I think that makes sense to me what you're saying. Once you know someone's name, I suppose, even if that's the only thing you know about that person, just knowing their name in your mind makes it humanizes them in the sense that, you think of them as a person, not just sort of an entity, that's trying to get money. This is an actual person. And if they're an actual person, then they have actual problems and actual challenges to overcome. And you will at least hope, if you even if you can't help necessarily, you'll hope that they do that. In fact, what that reminds me of is, and I don't know if you'll agree with me on this because this is a little bit of a political perspective, but when people discuss illegal immigration, I refuse to call them illegal or illegal aliens. I really hate that term and whatnot because my personal view, and I call them undocumented immigrants, because my personal view is that people who take a really hard line on that issue, the reason that they use terms like illegal alien is because it has a dehumanizing effect. So it's very easy for people who are hardliners on immigration to just say these very callous sounding things like, oh, just round them all up and kick them out or something, speaking about them as though they're not even people because, the ideological herd that they run with has sort of almost subconsciously in a way through language, through using terms like illegal and alien, has sort of used that to convince them that they're not real people. So you don't have to worry about them. I always say, there's no such thing as an illegal human being. But that's that's why I insist on calling them undocumented immigrants, because I have empathy for them, at least, certainly for the ones who were brought here, for example, as children through no fault of their own. And now they just want to stay and they're doing the right things and, are good people and probably have empathy for others themselves, so.
Right. Yeah, well, that's interesting. The use of the word alien. I hadn't really thought about that, but an alien is a non-human.
Exactly. Yep.
And to me, that's similar to we've talked a number of times about me being a Quaker, and I know that the Quakers like to talk about how at the very act of fighting in a war or being in war against other people, there's a requirement that you dehumanize the opponent.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine I've never been a soldier, and so I don't want to try to speak for soldiers, but I imagine that if you are out and there are people trying to kill you, that you're not concerned with what the names are of the people who are shooting at you.
Right.
They are obstacles in your path, and you're not thinking about them probably. I'd have to ask, but probably not thinking of them, at least in that moment, as another person that you're trying to kill so that they don't kill you.
Yeah.
But beyond that, on a political level, governments have to treat the people from the other governments as if they're not human. Those North Koreans that we may be fighting someday,
mm-hmm.
From what I can tell, I mean, how much fault do they have that their leader is the person who is going to order them to strap on a gun and try to kill the soldiers who are coming onto their land? A lot of them are going to be peasants,
right,
who don't really have much choice. And now you're out on a field and somebody's shooting bullets at you, and you got to shoot bullets back or you're going to die. So
exactly,
it's an untenable situation.
Exactly. Yeah, and they're just people. The North Korean citizenry. Probably. Well, I mean, they've been programmed. I'm sure some of them have been programmed successfully to hate America because they've been told that we're the boogeyman. But I'm sure some of them probably have figured this out, that, no, they're being programmed to think that we're bad because that's what they're told to think. But actually, an interesting example of that is Iran. We're always we've been at odds with them since I was a kid. Of course, I remember the hostage crisis, but they always say, the Iranian,
the great Satan.
Yes, the great Satan, Iran. But we're always told that the Iranian people actually really like America. It's just it's the leadership that is our adversary, but not the Iranian people. A lot of Iranians actually like America. They like Americans and would like to be more like America. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, how many people want to go to another country and have to apologize for Trump or Pelosi or Paul Ryan or whatever name you want to put in there? Those people got elected, but they don't necessarily represent what all of America is about.
Exactly.
The leadership of a country has to be separated from the most individuals, no matter what country, they just want to raise their kids and go to work and make the money and eat and drink and be merry. And
exactly.
Then someday they die. I'm convinced that the majority of people don't want to fight anybody and don't want there to be any conflicts. And
right.
It'd be nice if everybody could be comfortable and happy, and nobody's looking for that. Right,
exactly. Do you have any advice for parents, in terms of, because this sounds like, raising your child to have empathy and whatnot, it sounds like to a large degree it's setting the example. But are there things you should also be doing more proactively to kind of ensure that, or is it just mostly just as simple as setting the example of being empathetic toward others?
Well, I don't know that what I'm going to say is going to be any different than setting an example, but in the article that I'm talking about in my article, so all of my articles are based on research, and then I just translate the research for regular people who didn't study for a million years to know what all the big words mean.
Yeah.
One of the things that they found was that when you're predicting people who grow up to be very pro-social and to have high levels of empathy and to choose careers or lines of activity that are trying to help other people, that a large majority of them had parents who donated or volunteered to some kind of cause and were very vocal with their children, and in fact involved their children in those kinds of things.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
That's a little beyond just modeling it.
Yeah.
But I think it's enough personally that if you're sitting in front of the TV and a story comes up and it touches you, to say out loud how it's touching you so that your child can hear how a person might be touched by those kinds of things.
Right.
And when your child brings up something that's bothering them, then it's good to stop what you're doing and listen to what they're saying and show empathy for their own situation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I think adults find children's worries and concerns to be kind of silly, because even though we used to have those concerns, we grew up and now we know that if Susie doesn't want to go to the dance with you, it's not really a big deal. If you're in 8th grade, you'll be able to bounce back from that.
Right.
But if you're in 8th grade and Susie says no, that's pretty devastating.
It is.
So
yeah,
being able to empathize with your own children is also a part of the modeling, not just modeling people on television, but also modeling how to show that kind of empathy with your own kids when they're having their own issues.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Is there I don't know if you've ever seen an example of this, but there are those people in the world who are so empathetic toward others that it can almost becomes to their own detriment. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, actually, we've all known people who maybe take on a little bit too much of other people's problems, and they don't see it, you know, to the point that they may be harming themselves, you know, like maybe taking in someone into their home who is troubled, and it ends up, you know, backfiring on them or putting their family in danger or something. You know, I mean, have you ever seen anything like that happen up close? Because there's always, with anything, there's always a danger of going too far with it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I know there's a Bible verse that you probably have heard before, which is, you know, love your neighbor as much as yourself. And I've heard people pontificate about that and say, well, implicitly behind that is the idea that you can't love your neighbor unless you also love yourself. Mm-hmm. How can you love your neighbor as yourself if you don't love yourself, if all you're thinking about is other people? And I think that a person who is over the top trying to work for other people and not really taking care of their own needs, that's not necessarily empathy anymore. There's some kind of self-esteem or self-destruction behind that kind of behavior. So
interesting.
There's a school of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the strands of that has to do with the issue of mindfulness, which I think we talked about.
We did,
a little bit ago.
Yeah,
the idea of being able to think about your own thoughts and kind of stepping back from your emotions when you're having them, and being able to decipher what's real and what's not real, and having faulty cognitions and things like that. And one of the things that those therapists tend to say, especially with people like you're describing, is that everybody that you encounter is a precious person who is worthy of being loved. Mm-hmm. Your wife is precious and worthy of being loved. Your husband is precious and worthy of being loved. Your children, your mother, your father, and also you are precious and worthy of being loved. That it's all of that. And so sometimes the thoughts that people have, they can be very compassionate toward everybody else, but when they've made a mistake, they can't get beyond the regret and the guilt. And often I might say to a student who's in that situation, well, let's pretend that the person sitting in that empty chair next to you just made that mistake. What would you say to them?
Yeah.
And they're perfectly willing to tell this hypothetical person in an empty chair that everybody makes mistakes and try to get over it. You're still a good person, things like that. Mm-hmm. But being able to say that to yourself is sometimes challenging for some people.
Oh, for me, I can absolutely relate to what you were just saying. I'm very, very hard on myself in that way. So I totally get that. I can relate to that quite a bit. And I've had those conversations.
Yeah. I would say that you're going to, what I would like to say to people like you or people in situations like yours where you have a lot of feeling for other people's problems, but you're more dismissive of your own issues and you're harder on yourself about the mistakes that you've made, is that you're going to be a more effective helper of other people if you can have the courage to take your own advice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if what you would say to somebody else who did the same thing is it's okay, then you're allowed to give your own advice to yourself and tell yourself that it's okay.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the way you put that. I'm going to try to remember that because that's advice that I need to that I need to heed, because I have those it seems like all my life actually I've had those conversations with people where they've said, "Well, why are you so hard on yourself?" And people have actually said that to me, similar to what you just said. Well, if someone else had made that mistake that you made, what would you tell them? Would you tell them that they're a failure or that they're terrible or whatever? And no, of course not. Okay. And then they say, okay, well,
you would never treat somebody as poorly as you treat yourself.
Yeah. That's true.
I would never be such a jerk to another person as I am when I'm talking to myself.
Yeah.
Even though I am also a person who is precious and worthy of being loved, just like everybody else.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, no, I think
except for Paul Ryan, not Paul Ryan,
no,
but everybody else.
Right.
Everyone except Paul Ryan.
Yeah, not that guy. Jeez.
No.
IPMNation.com.
And we're back. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm pretty happy today. I have somebody in my living room. His name is Brian Richards. Say hi, Brian.
Hello, everybody.
So Brian is somebody that I recently met down in Milford, Delaware, because my wife and my son were in a play called The Elephant Man.
Which was fantastic, by the way.
Which was really well done. My wife and son, in particular, I think were excellent. But the entire cast was good, and it was great. And I saw it twice, and both times I cried at least 5 times. Did it make you cry?
It didn't, but actually, no, that's incorrect. There was one time I almost started to, and I was like, nope. Take it in. Suck it in.
Yeah. I just wondered whether it had that reaction for you, because as the listeners are going to find out, you have more of a connection to the story than the average person, and so perhaps it's not as foreign to you, the kinds of things that happen. So anyway, interesting. So we met at the play, and if you're not familiar with the story of The Elephant Man, it's about a guy named Joseph Merrick who was alive in the 1880s?
80s, 90s.
1880s. And he had a disorder called proteus syndrome.
Correct.
Nobody knew what that was called at the time. So can you explain what is proteus syndrome?
Proteus syndrome is a multiple diseases, condition-wise, that allows things to keep growing rapidly. It's almost like a cancer, but it's not. It allows you to grow, and it never turns off. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is if you have bony overgrowth all the time, if it gets chiseled away, if you have to have surgery for it, it'll just grow back.
Okay.
So you have to be very careful with what you have done, because every time you have something done, it can actually end up being worse.
Uh-huh.
But a lot of times it was a condition where you have things like fatty tumors, as we saw about on the Elephant Man video the other day.
Uh-huh.
And then it was also about the bone growth a lot of the times, but they have been deciding that there's a lot more to Proteus now than they thought beforehand. They've been finding a lot of heart issues, lung issues, and a lot of other internal problems now, not just externally.
Okay. So if I'm understanding this correctly, what you're saying is that the average person, from the time that they're born up until whatever time they stop growing, there's this gene, right? Didn't you say?
Correct.
There's genetic...
AKT1.
What is it?
AKT1 gene.
AKT1.
Yep.
Okay. So this gene is responsible for basically creating skin tissue and bone and all that to make everything, I guess, grow proportionally. Is that the idea?
Normally. For the standard human being, as they always grow, they normally stop growing at anywhere from 18 to 21.
Right.
When this is going on through the womb, wherever the part that gets affected will continuously grow to astronomical rates versus just the standard or typical way of people growing.
So different parts of the body end up growing faster or bigger than other parts of the body.
Yes, sir.
Right? And so if you're listening and you don't know what we're talking about, you can look up Google Images and go to Joseph Merrick, Merrick, and you'll see pictures of him, and you'll see that he was incredibly disfigured. He had some issues with one leg being bigger and kind of mangled, and an arm being bigger and mangled, right. And then lots of skin tumors on his head and stuff like that. And so the play is basically going through how he was treated by society in general. He had to join a freak show, right, in order to survive. But then he got picked up by a doctor and was able to stay in a hospital where he was looked after.
Right.
So the play is touching because you get to see, we understand now that someone with a disorder is still a person.
Yeah.
But back then, people didn't understand nearly as much.
True.
Yeah. So the reason that you're here is because you actually have proteus syndrome.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
The only person in Delaware.
So that's your claim to fame.
Yes.
You're
As
the one.
My parents always say to me that you're my claim to fame,
Right. Yes. Yeah. So how has that, like, when did you discover that you had that? Like, at what age was it apparent that something wasn't right?
I was diagnosed when I was 3.
3. Okay.
3 years old.
And so what part of your body had, like, tipped them off that something wasn't right?
Normally my toes. They saw that my toes were a little oddly shaped. I was growing abnormally in different areas. And then the person who diagnosed me, good old Dr. Shashadar Pai, love Dr. Pai, was my geneticist down in South Carolina when I was living down there. And he found me and he said, Eureka, I just came back from a conference that talked about this, and this is what you have.
Wow.
And I was tested for it probably 20 years later when they finally found out what causes it, or I was helping with that. And they found the same gene mutation through all of us, and that's how they got to, find out the AKT1 gene was to do it. But
so when did they discover that gene was responsible?
Probably about 10 years ago.
Wow, so very recently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now we're on drug trials.
Uh-huh.
So we started the first drug trial. I was patient number 2 in the drug trial test.
Okay.
And so we're trying it one step at a time to see what might minimize that gene and the mutation of it.
So now is it all right to use the word normal? Because the whole point of this conversation is that people with a disorder aren't necessarily abnormal.
You're
and
right.
Yet people are being judged all the time for being outside of this very strict box of what people call normal. But I can't come up with another word. So when we're talking about a normal person, when they get to the age where they stop growing, is it accurate to say that gene shuts down? It shuts off?
No.
Oh, okay.
It does not. Normally they told me I was supposed to be stopping growing around 24 because I had about a 3-year delay bone growth wise. But they have recently found out that what we thought when the people stopped growing would kick it off, but unfortunately it does not. So I'm not growing taller necessarily, but the places that have been affected are still technically growing.
But I'm talking about, like, for me. I don't have proteus syndrome.
Right.
Has
so
that gene turned off for me?
Yes. Normally, you have a time where your body will keep growing. I mean, you still technically have the AKT1 gene. And it technically will always, but it's minimal what will grow.
Okay.
If you break your finger's going to grow, your bone's going to heal and grow back.
I see.
But the same thing with us, if it grows and it breaks, ours can start growing exactly where it breaks.
Really?
Instead of healing, it can grow sideways, it can grow different kind of bones, it can grow a lot of different things, shards of bones, so it looks like a spike. So you really have to be careful not to try to break anything.
Yeah. But so, like, I know I'm going to ask some questions that sound pretty ignorant, but I'm ignorant about all this stuff.
And that's fine. Most doctors are too.
So if we put your hand on the table and cut off one of your fingers, are you saying that the finger will grow back?
Technically, not the finger as a whole, not the joint.
Right.
But what will happen is over time, they will start to come back in a manner like a finger, depending on how much that has been affected. Because things are affected and not affected, if you were to do that with a not affected part, it wouldn't really matter.
Right.
I've lost it. But if it was a part that was already had proteus inside of that got affected by it, then yes, most likely something could regrow or reshape because of it.
That's like a superpower, right?
Yeah, that's what I used to say. The military would love it, you know?
Right.
Oh, he you just got shot. He'll grow it right back.
Yeah, it just grows right. You're like Wolverine or something.
Exactly. That's what they used to call me because I used to heal very quickly.
Is that right?
About a day, you could do whatever. Next day, completely healed all over again.
Wow.
So it was...
How about that?
Now the older you get, the slower it's starting to go.
Well, yeah, so I recognize that if you're looking at pictures of Joseph Merrick online, you'll see that one of his arms is really big and misshapen, and then the other arm is a perfectly regular human arm, right? So it doesn't just go crazy and affect the whole body, it affects certain parts of the body.
Right.
Are there certain parts of the body that tend to always be affected by people with proteus?
Normally the feet and the hands.
The feet and the hands.
Feet and the hands are a big one. A lot of times with the people, it's also the knees. A lot of the joint-related aspects of everything.
So that seems like a clue to trying to figure it all out.
It can be. A lot of times we have something called rugae skin on the bottom of our feet. You saw it on the Elephant Man, on the photos, all that weird, it looks like brain tissue matter.
Said it looked like cauliflower or something.
Right. That is a different kind of skin that we have, and that's one of the leading factors to know whether you have proteus. It's called rugae skin, or cerebriform tissue. It looks like brain matter, pretty much. But a lot of times it's on our feet and stuff like that, and that's a big, big clue whether you have proteus syndrome or not.
And then I think I saw that there's a video online where you're showing people how you have to clean it or something?
Yes, I've had a video on my YouTube channel which is cleaning the feet because it's not a standard foot. It's not that you can wipe it off. So things will get in the crevices of them and then turn into moldiness.
I see.
And that's where everybody always says the smell comes from. When they were talking about the elephant,
they said that Joseph Merrick smelled.
Right.
But that's just because he had dirt inside the crevices.
Right. And before my wife came along, no one ever cleaned my feet. So I had 30 years of sock lint built up because you can't really see the bottom of it, but because it gets into the skin, it's like a brain fold. You have to literally separate every little piece and scoop everything out, and it does not smell good. It is sometimes very painful. I'm one of the people who can actually are allowed to do it. A lot of the doctors never wanted to touch it because they were too afraid because it's a very fragile skin, so I'm not allowed to really walk without shoes.
Is that because it's like the skin is being stretched?
It's actually because it's almost like an open wound that never will heal. So it's still closed way down at the bottom, but any kind of separation, it's like when you have a dry lip, your lips are all chapped, and you open your mouth too wide and it cracks the side of your lips.
Yeah.
It's very, very painful. The same duration goes to, or the same problem happens with the feet. In general, is that your foot wiggles a little bit while you walk. That can rip open the tissue, and a lot of times we also don't have any fat on our feet either. So anything that you step on, whether it's a grain of salt, will feel like somebody just stabbed you in the foot severely, and it's almost crippling sometimes when you're trying to walk without your shoes on because of the pain factor of it.
Yeah.
So I have custom shoes with custom insoles that allow me to, walk tall and be able to do it, but without it, there has to be carpet, there has to be something soft to walk on, and God forbid if there's anything on that carpet that you step on, it will hurt.
So when they say that people with proteus have a lot of pain, is the pain all due to the skin, or is it the bone is also in pain somehow?
A lot of the times what it is it's discomfort. There is a lot of pain that goes with it, but you're growing in a way that the body is not supposed to grow. And as you can tell by me, I know your audience can't see me, but because of the neck especially, my neck is crooked, just kind of like the Elephant Man was. If you have a side-by-side profile, you can see that we lean the exact same way. The problem with that is the muscle tension, because this is not linear, is not vertical, and having all this issues, it pulls on all the muscles. That then, hurts.
Yeah.
Then you're talking about having a bony structure, so all your knees are messed up, your feet are messed up. So then from your feet if your feet hurt, as everybody knows, everything else will hurt because then you have to limp. Your knee will hurt. Your limp will. Your hip will hurt, your back will hurt, and then you're out of alignment.
Right.
Well, we're always out of alignment. So a lot of times it's something like that will get painful, but then to correct it, you have to have lots of surgeries. And because of that, you have to do the surgeries, you have to do what they tell you to do. And there's a lot of pain, but a lot of times I always say comfort is overrated because there is nothing really comfortable. Even sitting here, I can't put my head back. So I can't use the headrest unless I'm like this.
Wow.
So no matter how I lay down, even on a bed, I have to have 2 pillows or a nice big pillow propping my head up because it won't support itself because of how the neck is.
Yeah. How about that? Incidentally, if you're interested in knowing what Brian looks like, there's a documentary about you on YouTube, right?
Yes, there is.
Yeah. Do you know?
Meet the Elephant Man.
What's that?
Meet the
Elephant Man, or you can search for Brian Richards documentary. That's how I found it.
Oh, okay.
So you can just type that in, and you'll get to see. And so in that documentary, you got flown to London, and you were able to see Joseph Merrick's skeleton.
Yes, that was that took me by surprise because every now and then you'll hear somebody wants to do something about the Elephant Man. Normally it's the Elephant Man. It never has to do with Proteus. I guess he's a big staple in our community.
Okay.
And because of that, they flew me in. First time I was over in the UK before.
Right.
And everybody was very nice. All the people were there. And I walk into this building. They never told me what was going on. And there standing was all the bones of Joseph Merrick.
They didn't tell you that that's what you were going to do.
I had no idea. I got off the plane, into this cab, went to a hotel, and then next thing I know, I'm here staring at these bones. And I was, wow. I mean, it was breathtaking.
Was that, so it was emotional for you?
It was, because a lot of times when you have a condition and you talk to all the people who have the same condition, as you know, it's very rare, you make a bond with that person. And I know he has been dead for 100 years now, or actually a little bit more.
Yeah.
But on the same token, it's almost like there was a bond between us, if that makes sense. Because he knew what I went through, and I probably know a little bit of what he went through. And because of that, you meet these kids who are remarkable at, they're completely different. Their legs can be completely sideways, and they're still trying to play soccer. And it's like, wow, these kids don't give up. I've never tried to give up. I don't believe in it. But so it was a big bond between him and me, and I was like, wow. So it was very emotional seeing him. It was like, this is something that, I could, and it was also very scary because I could see myself the same way. And I could see where his bones were messed up versus where mine were, and how many similarities there were between us. And not knowing him, I wish I did get to know him back in the time, but not being possible. So I just thought it was very strange and, breathtaking to see this person who looks a lot like you, skeleton structure, standing right before you.
Yeah.
So it did.
You're a lot taller than he is.
Yes.
Do you think that that's because we just have better nutrition now, and so you would have been taller than him even if both of you didn't have the disorder?
Well, technically, I know you don't know this, but I was supposed to be 8 feet tall.
Oh, okay.
Originally. I had, of course, as I was saying earlier, I had a lot of proteus in the knee, and because of that, I used to have to wear a lift.
Okay.
And because one leg would be growing to astronomical proportions, where the other one was regular. And so because of that, they had to do more surgeries, about, I think, 7 surgeries on the knee alone.
Right.
Just in order to slow down that bone growth.
Yeah.
Take out the growth plates and all that kind of stuff in order for my height to be down.
I see.
But depending, he was also, I think it was about 5'9", give or take, when everything was done. I know in the video he was lower, but he also had a bad hip, but in all honesty, if my back were straight now, I would probably be closer to about 6'8", probably 7 foot.
Right.
So, but because of all the curves in my back, and you do what you got to do.
So. Right. Yeah. You talked about these kids and the stuff that they do, and that you don't like to give up. And I didn't know this when we were talking before the show. You mentioned that you do karate or you do martial arts.
Martial arts, yeah.
And if you don't mind me saying so, the listeners can't see just how monstrous your feet are. Like your feet. Like what size shoes are you wearing?
These are actually 13.6E. They're the lightest shoes that they make. And if they had wider, I would get it. But I have a big bone that sticks out literally of the bottom of my foot.
Right.
My podiatrist always says it looks like I have an almond joy on my foot because there's a huge bone that sticks out dead center.
Right.
So my foot can't go down straight, so it has to angle. And so when I'm walking with my insoles in, it has a cushion so I can fit right in there.
Okay.
But if I never had some of the surgeries on my feet, then I probably would have had shoes I could not fit into.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, like, I definitely wouldn't want to get kicked.
That is very true. They do hurt. And the funny thing is, a long time ago, when I started training with martial arts, I went to my foot doctor, and they never wanted me to do martial arts back in the day because of the arthritic problems in the hand and because my feet and knee problems and all the others. Well, I never care what doctors say normally. Just because I have to live my life the way I need to.
Yeah.
And he says, Brian, I understand why it would hurt if you kick someone. I said, why is that? He goes, you literally have two ankles in one. So my left foot, I have actually two ankles right back to back.
Wow.
And one of the things that they used to have to do with my knee is had to have the knee surgery because it had two kneecaps in the same exact knee.
Wow.
So if I ever had to knee somebody, I'd have two knees to hit
you
over.
could break one and you still have one left over.
So it's always something. I have reserved for a lot of things.
Yeah. But how is it even possible for you to do martial arts? Like, it seems like you have to have a lot of balance and you have to...
Believe it or not, you do. And that's the biggest thing is a lot of times, a long time, a funny story was I went to see one of my instructors, my Sifu up in New Jersey, Dr. Lee. Love him to death. And I was training many years before seeing him, and I'm doing this one pose. He wasn't my main Sifu at the time. He wasn't my main instructor at the time. And I'm holding this pose like the best of them. And he's like, man, I've never seen anybody hold a pose like that. I said, why? He's like, you know why you're so good at this? I'm thinking, years of dedication in martial arts. There's this and this. This is all what I'm thinking. He goes, you got big feet.
Big feet, right.
And I was like, oh, you son of a gun. He got me. But it's, I put the time in, and anything I always go for, I try to go all the way. So no matter what it is, instruments, music, whatever, I always put everything I have into it. I might not be the best, but in 2010, I was actually inducted into the Hall of Fame of Martial Arts for the whole eastern coast of the United States because of how good I am at it. And I said, okay, well, that makes me feel good.
Nice.
And so because of it, I just never give up. And a lot of times people will tell you to give up. You just can't, because, a long time ago they were talking about, death when I was younger and issues that I was having. At the same time, if I was to give up, I wouldn't have the education that I've had because of, I don't need school. If I'm going to die, I might as well just give up and call it quits. Yeah. So my parents never allowed it. They would never allow me to give up, and it just stuck. And
so here you are, you're living a normal life, right?
Yep, as normal as we can.
Yeah. So let me ask some ignorant questions just for the purpose of, confronting the kinds of things that people might think, right? So obviously if this is genetic, then it's not contagious,
correct,
right? Like you can't catch it from anybody or anything like that.
And they found out actually nowadays that if you have proteus, it is even less likely to have a proteus child. Which beforehand I never really wanted children because I was afraid I could give it to them. This is when I was very young. Then they found out, then they said, no, you really can't. You can't give it because, like you said, it's genetic. It just runs in the DNA when you're, in utero. And then nowadays, it's like, you can have kids. We have a few patients or a few people with proteus who actually have kids, and no problem. So hopefully nowadays, people can have kids and realize that things aren't contagious.
Right. Yeah. How about... here we go. Is it true that you have human thoughts and emotions? Is that accurate?
I hope so.
You hope so?
My wife would tell me otherwise some days,
Oh,
but
right.
some days you're a robot. But then again, it actually took my wife to get that out of me. Was emotion. Because a long time ago, due to pain, surgery, people always making fun of you or having issues, you literally shut down. You shut down your emotion side.
Right.
So, if you were to say something, it would always be the same thing. Like, hey, how are you? Good. Right. And that would be the end of it. Because you did not want to express anything because people would use that against you. So it took a few years for me to be able to open up and express myself to her while dating. Because it was hard to get back into that. But nowadays, everything is, much better. And I tell people a lot of the times, it's because you have to accept yourself. And a lot of the kids with Proteus still can't accept themselves because of the issues that they're having. People still make fun of them and things on that nature, but they can't accept them. And because of that, I think I was 18 or 19 years old when I finally accepted that I had it. And ever after that, I was fine. But up until that time, I was always angry. I was always mad. I was always something because I had to deal with this problem that nobody else really had.
Right.
And I'm the only person in Delaware, the only
it's
person
not
in
fair.
Maryland, I'm the only, Virginia.
Right.
The next one, there's 2 in PA, there's 1 in New York, there's 1 in Florida. The next one I know about's in Arizona. So those are, it's a huge diverse.
And have you found that social media has allowed you to connect with people, that like geographically you wouldn't be able to get together with before there was something like Facebook? Are there communities on social media where people with Proteus can talk or support one another? Does that exist?
That does exist. The Proteus syndrome does exist. And they actually have the Proteus Syndrome Foundation, sorry. They do exist, and they actually allow us to have a meeting every about 2 years to get together to try to help out, to see how many people can get together with Proteus syndrome, to find out what's going on with it, to find out the protocols, the drug ways of, what works with medication and all the drugs that some of them have to take, whether it be seizures or pain or things of that nature. And then with Facebook. And then even like GoFundMe campaigns. I look for a lot of... I have a GoFundMe page myself for different things for handicap reasons, but on the contrary, I look for theirs as well. So I understand. I can say, hey, look, this person and is needing this, so I can talk to the Proteus Syndrome Foundation and say, hey, look, you might want to reach out to this person because they need a wheelchair or they need something. So I see it a lot now with people coming out with Proteus syndrome from all areas. I've met a few, probably 5 within the last month from, Australia, the UK, France. I just need to learn the languages better. And we're a little better at it.
Yeah. So how can people find your GoFundMe campaign?
I believe it's GoFundMe / the Richards or something along those lines.
The
My
Richards.
wife set it up a long while back
Okay.
because we were trying to buy a handicap accessible house. We finally got a handicap accessible house, kind of, sort of, but there's still some upgrades that need to be done to it in order to make it a little bit more handicap accessible.
Right.
And so because of that, it's coming along. It's really coming along. So slowly but surely, but every little bit helps.
So, something that occurs to me while we're talking is that, here you're talking to me about Proteus, and then the other people want to do the film, and it's about Proteus, and that's all anybody... Like, do you ever feel resentful that everybody's just looking to you to provide information about this thing that you've been having to struggle with all your life?
Well, I look at it as, I know what I went through when I was a young child, with all the pain, with all the surgeries, all that kind of stuff. And I've always thought I would rather be able to do what I can to make another kid not suffer. And because of that, if it's me taking on the role of, letting people know what Proteus syndrome is, doing all the medical research, doing all the drug testing, doing whatever I can, to me, this isn't my life. And I think there's another purpose for this life for me personally, is that it's my job to try to help more in order to fix the issue. But on the same time, everybody knows if you say, "Oh, I have cancer, I have diabetes, I have this," people know what that is.
Right.
When you go to a doctor and they have no idea what it is, and 90% of them don't.
Yeah.
Then you have to be your own advocate. And then you have to say, "Hey, look, this is what I have, this is what I've gone through." And every time I meet a new doctor, I have 4 sheets of surgical things. This is all the sheets of my medical. This is all, and they're like, "Wow, this is all typed up." Yeah, because you have to take control of it because nobody really knows of it.
Right.
So I would rather get the word out. And I've always told people I wish they would ask, because a lot of times they just assume that you're mentally retarded, that you have this issue. I'd rather them ask and say, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" And, because when I moved up to Delaware, because I was shaded.
Shaded? What do you mean?
I guess you would say I didn't talk to many people. I didn't want anybody to know about me.
Oh, okay. All right.
I think there's a better word, but I can't think of it.
This is the old person in me not understanding, but now I get the word.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I told myself I would not tell anybody what I had when I came up here, because I didn't want anybody to know. I didn't want them to judge me. And I did it for even 4 or 5 years. I was in high school, and people were like, "What's wrong with you?" "Oh, I just have arthritis," because of course my hands. And they're like, "Oh, what's wrong with this?" "Oh, it's this." There was always another reason. I never came out and said, "Well, I have proteus syndrome." And then down the line, I was like, you know what? I should embrace who I am and what I have. So I started talking to people about it, and I just don't stop because it's good information, because people judge a lot.
Right.
So that's mainly why I really don't have an issue with it nowadays, because people need to know, and that's the only way.
Yeah.
This world's all about information. You can go online and look up anything nowadays.
Right.
But if you don't have a
But if you don't even know that it's a thing,
right, or
what the search term is, then you're not going to find it.
Right. And people still don't even think the Elephant Man exists, or did exist. They're like, "Oh, that was an actual person?" Yeah, it was an actual person.
Thought that was just an allegory.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of time they don't believe it's an actual human being that was behind it.
I see. Yeah, well, so it seems like that's the main message of the play is, here's this person who is suffering and society is judging him and he's not being treated well, and yet here we are 130 years later knowing that this is a person.
Right.
And it provides kind of an opportunity for all of us to reflect on not judging a book by its cover, or whatever kind of pithy expression you want to use.
Yeah, that's pretty much about right.
Right.
And a lot of times when I had an instructor one time that was talking to me, and I said, "Wow, I'm glad I don't have what they have." And he looked at me and goes, "Why are you happy for their misery?" I said, "I'm not happy for their misery. I'm not happy for anybody's misery.
Right.
But I'm glad I don't have that condition, whatever that condition was at the time." And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is it's hard to walk in somebody else's shoes. They will never understand it, regardless if they have perfect health and no health, lots of money or no money. But people always want something, but they don't ever want to be sick. Nobody wakes up today and says, "I really want cancer." That way I can say I beat it. Nobody really does it.
Yeah.
But because of that, people need to understand, that it's just not a thing that we ever wanted or did for it. But because of the Elephant Man, people now understand a little bit more, because they did pity him a lot, as you saw in the play. They always pitied him. "Oh, here's your new comb. Here's your new whatever."
They're giving him things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's in his presence, but at the same time, it just doesn't work well. But
yeah. So, are you hopeful for the research that's being done? Do you feel like they're moving in the right direction? This is eventually going to get solved, or whatever word you want to use there?
We have a fantastic group at the National Institutes of Health that have been doing lots and lots and lots of work for a very long time. I've been part of the NIH for about 18 to 20 years now, doing all the research protocols, them doing biopsies and x-rays and blood work. I mean, it's so much that they do while they're there. I love the NIH because, of course, they do it free charging for me and all the people who they use there, because it's normally for clinicals and things of that nature.
I see.
And trials and trying to...
I was going to ask how you paid for all of this.
Yeah, well, a lot of times when it's here, you have a lot of normal doctors. There they do the research for everything.
Okay.
They have found a lot of different issues that they've never known proteus exists, that the issues with the proteus, I should say. And because of that, they're very beneficial. But surgery still costs lots of money. I think my last one one of my lungs one was like $250,000. So because of insurance, it does help, but there are still lots and lots and lots of bills that you have to pay. And even for pain management. I mean, you have acupuncture, massage therapy, all that stuff works some of the best for proteus because of the tight muscles and asymmetry and all that, but it's still all out of pocket.
I see.
You still have a lot to pay for because of it,
right?
But you have to go on. So, but I am very hopeful. To answer your question, I'm very hopeful. We have a fantastic team that has dedicated their life for this, and the older people and older generation have pretty much dedicated their lives in order to make sure that the younger kids don't have the same issues that we did.
Yeah. So earlier, we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but you said that I was allowed to ask anything I wanted. So is there anybody, medical people, who have said, like, these are the possibilities for how this is going to kill you? Like, is it going to kill you, or do the surgeries keep it from getting that far?
That's I've never actually heard that question.
Okay.
That was a fantastic question.
All right.
There have been a few doctors in the past who say, this could kill you. This will, they try to baby you so much. That's why I did the martial arts. That's why I did everything else, because I was tired of people telling me I couldn't do it. And we might do it differently, but at the same time, I had a doctor tell me I can't ride a bicycle. I said, why can't I ride a bicycle? I said, my knees are still shot, but I still like riding. He goes, well, it's too dangerous for you. I said, well, how do you get to work every day? He was living in D.C. He says, well, I ride my bike to work. I said, I'm riding in Dover, Delaware.
Right.
You're riding in Washington, D.C. I think I'm a little safer than you are.
Yeah.
But there have been a few doctors that, say this could end up killing you. And a lot of the times the doctors misdiagnose because they don't listen and they don't understand. I had a headache a long time ago in the front, and they say, oh, no, if it was there, it would be on the side. Well, ended up to be a brain infection, ended up, a week to live. So because of, the differences of how we are, things always change. So the smallest thing, it's like anybody else. You just have to listen to them when it's a medical necessity, and understanding that, when I had my lung done, my lung surgery could have killed me. Yes, that's not a problem. Or any of the surgeries still can kill you. I've had 41 surgeries. There's a lot more still to come.
Yeah.
I think probably at least 2 more this year. 1 next week. So
really?
So like I said, it's always something that you have to change for, but it's you have to fight a good fight. And when my time is up, my time is up. I get that. I'm not going to be weary or sad about, I'm 37 and I'm going to die. No, it's just like, I've had 37 years of great life. What else can we do?
Is that how old you are now?
34.
34.
Yep.
So you're giving yourself, for sure, another 3 years.
I'm hoping so. Come on. We can do it together, I tell you. So, like I said, I don't see any date of when my checkout period is.
Right.
But, as I told everybody, you can walk down the street and get hit by a car and be dead, right then and there, or you can, live another 100 years and you never know.
Right.
But you always have to make it a good life.
That seems like a message for the listeners out there that, somebody like you, you can imagine somebody who is having to struggle for their entire life with something that most people don't have to even think about.
Right.
That could kind of get on your nerves, right? And like you could imagine people becoming alcoholics or like drowning the pain or doing things to try to forget about it or be out of depression.
Yeah.
And then here are the rest of us, and we're thinking, well, we're not him, but then, like you said, any of us, including you, listener, could die today, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
You never know. So all of us are actually living a life where the clock is ticking. We don't know how far the clock goes before it runs out of steam.
Yep. And I've seen a lot of patients with proteus come and go. And it always bothers me because they're a lot younger than I am. I said, Lord, you could have taken me, that's fine, and I would have been fine with it. But understanding that, you have to take every stride as best you can. I've never met a person with proteus syndrome who is depressed, who doesn't ever try. They always try their hardest no matter what it is. And they inspire me because I'm like, you know what, if they can deal with this, I can deal with this with no problem. Their legs are 10 times bigger than mine. Their fingers look like sausages. I mean, my fingers are big, but not like some of them. And I looked down and I said, you know what? I have another day. Every day is a good day. I'm above ground. I'm alive. We can keep pushing on. Until that time comes, every day is a good day. It's what you make out of it. So we try to. And
that's for all of us. So,
yeah.
Very nice. All right, so if you want to reach out to Brian Richards and say something nice to him or whatever, tell him some ways. He's on Facebook.
Yep, on Facebook. Everybody can find me. I'm posted everywhere when you look up proteus syndrome. So, and if you have any questions, please, I have people all around the world. They message me when they see the documentary or something along that nature with questions.
Right.
Please. I'm always an open book, as I told you earlier. Always an open book.
Okay, great. All right, so reach out to Brian Richards. I thank you for listening. If you have any requests for me, somebody that you think I should interview, or you're looking for some kind of counseling or consultation about some issues you're having, especially as they regard to parent, you can reach out to me at info@drjohnrich.com. And until I come back next week, I'll talk to you later.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be